And let's welcome in Victoria Churchill from Young Voices. Back to the program. Good to talk to you again, Victoria. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk about Portland and what is going on there. The story is, in my view, being underreported, and we wanted to have you on to kind of highlight what's going on there with the anti-ICE protesters. There was a journalist, conservative journalist. His name is Nick Sorter. He was, this sentence doesn't even click with me. He was arrested after rescuing a burning American flag from anti-ICE protesters. Actually, protesters isn't even the right word. Anti-ICE terrorists. So he rescued a burning flag and then he was detained. When did that become a crime?
Well, that's a very good question. It really seems to me like in these liberal cities, there is this idea of this two-tiered system of justice. And, this isn't just something that I think. This is something that permeates all throughout the Trump administration. Just this past week, 2 days ago, we had Attorney General Pam Bondi on Capitol Hill testifying about the goings-on in the Justice Department, and really, I think, in large part, shedding a light as to what went on, particularly during the Biden administration, that her team has had to kind of go in and clean up and figure out what was happening, particularly with the FBI and the DOJ. And, just yesterday, President Trump had journalists that had faced Antifa in the face, this group that some people on the left think doesn't even exist. I'm on Sundays on this show on GB News. It's a debate show, and it's myself who's more on the conservative side, and then the other guest that's more of a liberal. And he said now 2 weeks in a row that he doesn't think Antifa exists. Which I think if you talk to these journalists that were at the White House earlier this week, they're going to say it very much exists. They've faced them personally, and if it wasn't for them going out and doing this journalism, that a lot of the times has had them have physical harm. They've gotten in legal trouble. And of course, with Sorter, he actually had his case, kind of dismissed after he got arrested. But just the fact that he did get arrested initially, I think, is a reason to ask questions.
Absolutely. Anti-ICE, Antifa, whatever you want to call them, they absolutely do exist in cities like Portland. And, looking at the situation there, you see state leaders and local leaders in Portland. I saw a clip of some guy yesterday. I don't know if he was the mayor of Portland or the governor of Oregon or who he was, but he said there's nothing to see here. If we pull back, he's like, there's people riding their bikes and they're going for walks and they're having coffees and going to farmers markets. I mean, maybe in the liberal suburbs, there's nothing going on, but there absolutely are some problems with Antifa or anti-ICE in downtown Portland, and it continues.
It absolutely does continue. And here's the thing, and this is something that I heard one of the journalists talking about during this White House roundtable earlier this week, is that he's actually interviewed the same person in multiple cities at these protests. And so I think that really goes to show that there does seem to be some kind of coordinated effort behind it. Earlier, just a couple of years ago, there was the Stop Cop City protest in Atlanta, for example. And I believe that during those riots and protests, that there was a lot of people that were arrested that lived nowhere in the area. And, these activities keep popping up all over the country. Just earlier this year, of course, we had the Los Angeles protests, and Chicago. Now I'm sure there will be even more protests, of course, as the National Guard is descending there.
Right.
And so I think it really makes you wonder, how do these people get these resources to go from city to city and really cause carnage?
It's a great question. Victoria Churchill from Young Voices. So let's follow the money here. These are professionals. These aren't folks who have full-time jobs. Then they just do this in their free time, where they go into the basement or the garage and they spray paint a sign, an anti-Trump sign or something. These are well-funded professionals. I mean, tactical gear is not cheap. So follow the money. Where are they getting the cash to do this?
Well, that's a good question. I think this is something that the Trump administration has said multiple times, even multiple times this week, that they plan to look into these funding networks. and see what happens. Conservative journalists have been reporting on strains of it here or there, that, an organization said it's funded by some major foundation, right? And then the foundation typically doesn't have to disclose its donors, but I think there are still other ways to figure out what kinds of donors fund those foundations and, go from there. Also, you can look at political donations, which of course are public, and a lot of the times the people that do have their names on public political donations are also funding, to even higher degrees, organizations that are, even in this case, very left-wing and that have involvement with other organizations. And so, you'll say there's these nonprofits, they're all over the country, they're funded by, for example, the Open Society Foundation, which of course has ties to George Soros and now his son Alex Soros, who seems to be kind of following in his father's footsteps with a lot of these organizations that he thinks are great, but I think if we really look at it objectively, are causing harm and sowing division all over the country.
So it's really important, Victoria, that we have these journalists going into cities like Portland and Chicago and elsewhere reporting on what is going on, because if it was left up to legacy media, we wouldn't hear these stories. So journalists like Nick Sorter, who was arrested for rescuing a burning American flag, doing a really good job, because if it was left up to mainstream media, these would be mostly peaceful protests.
Right, absolutely. And again, I don't think that you can have some of these cases and just leave them just to what they are. For example, I did a story tied to the Los Angeles protests earlier this year that there was an organization that they did have a peaceful ICE demonstration kind of in the beginning of that week or so, where there was really the flare-ups of Los Angeles. But, to a lot of people, that peaceful demonstration was kind of the catalyst for what then turned into non-peaceful demonstrations. And that organization, surprisingly, actually, outside of private donors, that organization had actually gotten funding from the Department of Homeland Security during the Biden administration. And so, these webs of funding just have to be untangled. And, again, particularly when it comes to things like government funding, that actually is all public. And so that's where, even if you aren't directly in these cities, you can still have journalism that is impactful. Like, I think, maybe even you guys might have had me on, but I went on talking to a couple of different radio stations the week after I put out that reporting that, this organization had actually had its grant shut down by the Trump administration just a few months before. But, I think a lot of the times these journalists, like myself even, that can do this work that is tied to these protests but not even directly on the ground, you can shine a light, which then when you have an administration that is willing to look at this, it actually shows them where to look and what funding streams to cut off if you see that they are tied to illicit activities, even if not directly, that they can serve as a catalyst for those illicit activities.
It's going to be interesting to watch what happens in Chicago specifically this weekend. Victoria, you're doing great work. Keep it up. Good to talk to you again. Victoria Churchill from Young Voices. Thank you for the time this morning.